Well, thanks for letting me talk for just 20 minutes. That's what I have. 20 minutes on Robinhood. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Robinhood, and I want to do a quick primer on it. Now, this is obviously education finance and Robinhood, a very complicated, long, tedious subject, but I think it's worth the 20 minutes. I'll have to skip some portions of it, of course, because nothing has more formulas and more rules than education finance. But with that, I do want to just go through it and talk about what it means to me. I'm 100% against Robinhood. I'm very, very biased against it, so don't expect a completely unbiased deal. For me, wealth redistribution, there's just two views on this. You're for it or against it. If you're conservative, Republican, like Abraham Lincoln, you believe that wealth redistribution is one thing and only one thing, which is to weaken the strong strengthen the idea that Abraham Lincoln says you cannot strengthen the weak by weakening the strong, and that's true. A lot of us in America, the goal is to go be successful, to go in to make money, and any time that you provide any kind of disincentive towards that, people will say, hey, well, why should I go and work that extra hour if I'm going to be charged half of it, 50% or 60% or 70%? I can do other things instead of that. So that's the disincentive. And then there's other people, of course, on the more liberal side, like Barack Obama, who believe that, hey, spread the wealth around. It doesn't really matter. As long as you get that money and you go and you put it in the pockets of everyone, it'll eventually move its way up into the system. Well, that hasn't worked. It's never worked. But the federal government and every government since inception has tried to do this in some way or another. And so if you go and you look, the federal government is just not lacking in any examples of wealth redistribution. And so I thought I'd focus on one, which by another name is the Obama phone. Now, and I'm sure you've read, and so Obama didn't create the Obama phone fund, which he wishes he could take credit for it. But it's really known by the Universal Service Fund. And if you look at your telephone bill or even your cable bill, you'll go and you'll see a tax. And on that tax is the Universal Service Fund. And what happens is all that money gets pooled, and it's been doing it for the past 25 to 30 years. None of us begrudge the fact that there are people in our society that are really poor, that are disabled, that really do need help. We obviously don't want children starving. We do feel that we should support disabled veterans and so on. But where the issue is where you draw that line. And the government programs, like all government programs, like to grow in scope, grow in size, and eventually go well beyond what their stated goals and scope are. Now, the Universal Service Fund was initially created to provide the poorest people in the most rural areas a landline, a telephone, so they could go and call 911, so they could go and look for jobs. But of course, just like other program, it just grew. And you can see since 2008, when Barack Obama became president, it's more than doubled the number of people who get the services through that fund. And what happened is, just like any entitlement, people say, well, okay, I got a free landline, but you have a cell phone. I want a cell phone. I don't have text messages. I think I should get text messages too, and internet and broadband and all of that. So you see, that's where we are today, is now we're funding in a lot of these areas this Universal Service Fund. Now, aside from being on principle wrong, you can see that what happens is things become unfair. In Alaska, the amount that they got from the fund last year came out to about $5,000 per resident. I don't think any of us are getting about $5,000 in land fees. There's this one corporation in Oregon that's got about $16,000 from that fund per subscriber. You can see what's supposed to be equitable for everyone ends up, because of formulas and other things, getting redistributed inequitably. So we'll go. So of course, with the issues with redistribution in general, is that people get the sense of entitlement. Like I said, that hey, I don't have that, I want that. So also always a lack of transparency and accountability in those subjects. I used to work for a company. It was a big internet company that started right around the time the internet got created. And it was about 1995, and all of the engineers that worked there, we had the most incredible access to the internet, massive pipes. And it was cool. So a lot of people would sit home and sit in their offices and just fool around on the internet all the time. You would just go and see everybody just downloading this and downloading that. So at one point, the CEO of the company says, you know what, it's going to be too difficult for me to go and manage all this to give you terms of use for this thing, so we're just going to do this. How about you can go to any website you want? I don't really care. But when you go to a website, we're going to take that link and we're going to put it on another website with your name on it. And what happened is that your manager or you could go and look at your friend in the cubicle next door and be like, oh, I didn't know you were going to that site. Internet usage went way down, pretty much close to zero, except for work and effort. And so to me, things like the Universal Service Fund, why don't we have access to see who these people are calling? We should. I mean, maybe not to know that Bill Jones is making that phone call, but in aggregate, how much of these calls are being used for that purpose, and how many are being used to go and basically campaign for president or something. Okay, so now for me, my big deal here in Texas, because yes, the federal government does it, but so does Texas, and the big deal is Robinhood, which to me is just a transfer of wealth to waste. And when we go through it, we'll see exactly where some of this money goes. Now, the history of Robinhood is long, and there's been a lot of court cases, so I'm just going to put 3 bullet items here. What happened is prior to 1984, what would happen is local school districts would fund their own schools from within their local community. And as they did that, a lot of them found out that they weren't getting as much as the person in the cubicle of the school district next to them. So they said, well, we want some of that. And they started to basically start a group that focused on discrimination and inequitable financing in the school districts. They eventually went out and they did a lawsuit called Edgewood ISD. And again, it was focused on discrimination, and the Supreme Court agreed with them. The Texas Supreme Court agreed with them. In the Texas Constitution, it says that we will have basically a free and inefficient system to educate everybody in Texas. Again, I don't think anybody has a problem with providing a public education to children who can't do it any other means. But how do you fix that? And it took a lot of other lawsuits and a lot of other legislation to get to the point in 1993 where Robinhood was created. And what that did is it capped the tax rates that all the school districts could charge to $1.50. And then it said, we're going to confiscate the dollars from these wealthier school districts, take those dollars and give it to the poorer school district. That went on until about 2005 when people came to the conclusion that that's actually unconstitutional as well. See, what happens is if you go and you take everybody's dollars, if the state does that, you take everybody's property tax dollars, and you go and you send it back out, you've created a statewide property tax. And that's just unconstitutional. So the legislature did another Band-Aid fix. And the Band-Aid fix was, okay, so you don't have enough discretion in what you're charging, we'll lower the tax rate, and you can raise it up. And that's exactly what happened. So we're exactly in the same boat we were in 2005, except as I'll show you, the system's actually gotten worse and more unmanageable. Okay, I'm going to try it. This is a chart that kind of shows how Robinhood is done at a really high level, and then I'll go through just a couple of slides on the formula. Hopefully you can hear it. But in your school, when you look at your property tax bills, you have a lot of different taxing districts that you're taxing under. School districts have 2, which is M&O, which is maintenance and operations, which goes primarily for the maintenance, the school teachers, administrators, utilities, and so on. And then there's an I&S tax rate, which basically goes to pay off the bond and the debt on those deals. So Robinhood is primarily focused on the M&O portion of the tax rate. So the way that the system is set up right now, everything up to $1 per $100 of tax rate. If you live in Southlake, you're at $1.04 right now. If you live in Grapevine, Colleyville, you're also at $1.04. I don't know all the school districts, but let's say you're at $1.04 and you live in Southlake. From $0 to $1, your money gets split into 2 pieces. The recapture portion is money that is going to be confiscated and sent to other school districts. A percentage of it goes to these other school districts, and the rest of it is called Tier 1, which you can keep inside of your own school district. If your tax rate is between $1 and $1.06, they call that golden pennies. And they call that golden pennies because you get to keep them. So if you're at $1.04, and you live, again, let's say in Grapevine, Colleyville, Southlake, between $1 and $1.04, you get to keep all those dollars. Here in Southlake, there was an attempt to increase the property tax rate by an additional 2 cents. The reason 2 cents was chosen because that would be the most that they could get in golden pennies. Because after $1.06, you start to share once again with the other school districts. So if you decided to go and go all the way to $1.17, you would pay your recapture here, you get to keep this, and then a percentage of it would go and get recaptured as well and sent to the other school district. So it's very difficult for Robinhood districts, which is also called Chapter 41, to go to the taxpayers and say, hey, let us raise the tax increase into this, because people say, well, I don't want to give money to other school districts. That's it, the summarized version, but if you go to the next one, there's like 1,000 pages on how to calculate this. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and every single piece of it that you see just frustrates you more and more, because you can see all the special interests have gone in to try and catch their piece of the pie. The first thing you have to do is calculate what's called the average daily attendance, which is basically how many kids are going to school in your school district. For sake of argument, let's say again where we are right now, there's about 7,000 children in the school district. Now, every kid is not created equal, okay? Because let's say if you're a special ed, a student who receives special ed services, you get more points. If you're someone that takes English as a second language, there's also more points on that. And so you basically refine the value of each person who's attending your schools based on a variety of different factors. Okay, so the adjusted allotment, they do a multiplier. And that multiplier is based on things like cost to educate in each ISD. So they look at the cost of living in each different school districts and adjust. I just want to make one point. Rob Eisler, who is currently the Public Finance Committee Chair, he went through this. It's an awesome 1 hour. All of these adjustments are all positive, okay? They just get bigger and bigger and bigger. There's no subtractions anywhere in the deal. So in this cost to educate in each ISD, they look at how much teachers are. Size of school district, the bigger the school district, the more money you get. Now, most businesses, the reason they get bigger is to do an economy of scale and say, hey, now that we're bigger, we can go and we can amortize this cost over more people. Not true when it comes to ISD land. There, what they're focused on is you have Dallas ISD and Houston ISD, and they went and they used their state representatives to go and push to make sure those multipliers are bigger. Sparsity is another factor. That's how many miles your kids have to travel to go to school. So school districts that are more rural also get more money. You multiply those two numbers and you get the Tier 1 entitlement. That's how much money that school district is entitled to receive. We're almost there. All right. So there's another number called a local fund assignment. What happens there is you get your tax rate, a lot of numbers there, but you get your tax rate and you multiply by the prior year's property tax rate. That's how much money you can receive in property tax in your school district. So that's how much money the school district can raise. The other money is how much they're entitled to. You subtract those two numbers, and if you're entitled to more than you can raise locally, the state's going to give you that much money. Okay? So if you're entitled to this much, but for a variety of different reasons you can only raise that much, the state's going to give you that. Now, where does the state get that money? If you're negative, which is true for, at least in this area, I know we have people from Northwest ISD, Carroll ISD, Grapevine Colleyville ISD, at least locally here, are school districts where that number is negative. Okay? They're entitled, the amount that they raise more money than they're entitled to. So they're considered Chapter 41 or a Robin Hood district. So if we go to the next section, what it basically comes down to is how much money you have in property value per student. Okay? And these are two of the big numbers. So your property wealth is greater than $476,000 per student, and one for $319,000. Here's the deal. If you live in Grapevine, 1/3 of the airport is inside of your school district. Okay? There's no students, there are no kids in that area. Well, there shouldn't be. And so all of that property value gets added to that school district. Okay? And when you divide by all of those various property values, here in Southlake, we have the Southlake Town Center. That Southlake Town Center right now is not included because of some deduction that they took in 1997. But in 3 years, that whole town center will go and get added onto the rolls here, which will make this school even more Robin Hood. How do you reduce your wealth levels? Okay, I'm wealthy, at least by this definition. How do we reduce our wealth levels? One is you can consolidate with another district. So if there's another school district nearby that doesn't have that same value, you can consolidate, you merge, you're no longer considered wealthy because the property value has been divided by more students. You can detach property, Grapevine, get rid of the airport. You say you don't want anything to do with it, and you won't get that value anymore. Skip 3. 4 is you can get other students from other school districts to come to your school. The goal, that's why you'll see a lot of times the goal of a lot of administrators is to go and get a higher population. The more population you get, the less per student you have. 3 is just consolidated tax base. Option 3 is what most school districts do. And what they do is they end up giving all that money to the state. Okay, they give that money to the state, and the state goes and says, thank you, and we're going to go and share it with the less fortunate ISDs. All right, we'll go to the next one. So, okay, tons and tons of problems with the system. First, just on principle, it's wrong, right? The idea that we should go and take money from one school district and give it to another, taxation without representation, whatever you want to call it, there's a lot of issues on principle. Practice, too. Any time that you do this, obviously there's a lot of people who are going to try and get their piece of it. This money that goes into the school district, goes into the state from your local school district, goes into the general revenue fund. There's no guarantee, mandate, or whatever. It just goes into the state fund, and then people like me get to do a lot of stuff with it. So here's the other thing. This is the crazy part, and I was talking about this with Darrell right before we came. So let's look at these wealthy school districts, okay? Over half of all the students who live in a Robin Hood district are on free or reduced lunch. Okay? So, you have this concept that, okay, this is the wealthy areas, but a lot of these school districts are what's considered rooftop poor. The people who live in those areas might be poor, but they might have a refinery, or they might have a big industry that's in the area. And that alone gets them to be into Robin Hood. I personally talked to a principal who said over half of his students get free lunches. Robin Hood. The state goes and says, you're too wealthy, and we're going to give this to other school districts. Second problem, there's just not enough money from all the Robin Hood districts, almost no matter how much you take from them, to go and solve what the other school district think is their deficit to support this. If you watch the Mitt Romney-Barack Obama debate, Mitt Romney had mentioned, hey, well, if you raise the tax rate to whatever it is, you're only going to be able to fund another 8 or 9 weeks of the federal deficit. That's essentially true. At some point, there's just not enough money from the Robin Hood part to solve this supposed lack of money in education. Now, this last bullet. There's about just over 1,000 school districts, I think 1,100 school districts. 375 of them are considered wealthy. When this program first started, it was about 100. Okay? So over the last 4 years, last 4 or 5 years, while the economy has been, we'll say, not doing very well, we've almost quadrupled the amount of Robin Hood considered districts. At the rate that we're going, pretty soon everyone's going to be considered poor. And that's making it more and more the case that it's once again a statewide property tax. Now, obviously, what a lot of people say about Robin Hood is this was designed by lawyers and not economists, which is what the problem is. Here's the other thing. Let's say I go and I look at a house, and I want to go in a house. And what do you judge the value of a house on? You judge the value of a house, granite countertops, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, all of that. But you also look at what payments you're going to have to make to live inside of that house. And one of those big payments, maybe the biggest payment, will be how much you pay in property taxes. And so if you sit there and you think, well, I'm paying all of this in property taxes, but where I live, that money's not coming back into this district, well, I don't want to pay that much for this house, right? I mean, if you're paying whatever you're paying that goes outside, there's no reason to do it. And that creates what's called a death spiral. Because people will move out. People will say, well, why, and in South Lake, I know it happened in Colleyville and all these areas where people, once their children are out of school, they're like, well, why should I continue to be here? That cost, economists think, about $27,000 per pupil in property values. In other words, property value in Texas would be significantly higher if we didn't have this program, which in and of itself is inefficient. Where does the money go? I could talk for like an hour about all the waste and all the stuff that goes in education. When you look at when this program started, we've been putting in, the Robin Hood districts have put in about $1 billion a year into this program. Highland Park alone has put in $1 billion of its own money since this program started. And the school districts that have been receiving these dollars since this program started have shown absolutely no improvement in dropout rate or in tax scores, SAT scores. So it's almost like a big flush when you go and put this money down. Go to the next slide. Here's just a quick example of schools, districts that are Chapter 41 and schools that receive money. So the ones in red are the school districts that pay into the Robin Hood system, and the white ones receive. Generally you can see East Texas gets a large portion of the dollars. The Panhandle in the southern part of Texas gets a significant amount of the dollars. Now, this is as of today. A few years ago, what you would see is, is even more compact in this area here. But here what's going to happen is with oil and energy drilling down here, is just seeing an increase in those school districts who were all for Robin Hood until they became part of it themselves. And that's why I hope you will see a change, not this session and right after. And the thing is, the battle is this. If Houston ISD receives money, okay, and you have 24 of the 150 state reps, what do you do? And I'll work on fixing it here in a second. So we can do that. This is District 98. That just happens to be the district I'm part of. And Carroll ISD, Grapevine, Cottonville, and Northwest ISD have put in, $630 million since it started. Actually, I was supposed to take out Northwest ISD. With Northwest ISD, it actually goes to about $870 million. Carroll ISD is 153. Grapevine and Colleyville pays $477 million they've paid. That's property taxes that you have paid that have gone to other school districts. Northwest is about 240. This year, Carroll ISD is going to send almost $14 million from here to other school districts. And there's a chance the Carroll ISD superintendent may drop by, but if he doesn't, I think he'd be more than happy to tell you the cuts that they're going to have to make, or the cuts that they're working on. Meanwhile, I, the taxpayer, have paid $14 million too much. Okay, fixes. Really quickly, there's a lot of ideas. One is lawsuit. There's actually 5 lawsuits going on right now, winding its way up to court. One of those 5 lawsuits is the Texas School Coalition, and their focus is on the Robin Hood side. They have a lot of the Robin Hood districts supporting them. I agree with half of their argument. What they're saying is don't Robin Hood us anymore, give a lot more money to the other schools. Right? I agree with the first half. But in that lawsuit, what's going to happen is it's going to go to the Supreme Court at some point, probably by October of next year, October 2013, and then they may call in the state representatives and the legislature in total to come in and do a special session to go and fix that. I believe that Robin Hood, the way it is now, is in fact a statewide property tax. There's absolutely no difference to me if you're taking half the money from half of the state and giving it to the rest, that the school districts then have lost absolutely all control to be able to go and move the money around. So it's unconstitutional on its face. The second part is, we have to sit down, and I think the next speaker will maybe talk about it, which is redefining education. What should we be funding when it comes to education? Is band education, reading, writing, arithmetic? I think we have to sit down and have an honest discussion about what we're going to fund. And I believe that we should fund that level to every single school district here in the state of Texas. But above and beyond those items, you're going to have to ask your local district for those dollars to fund it. Just because one school district has something and one doesn't mean that you should be entitled to get that. What it means is you may have to pay more for those extracurricular or above and beyond items. Local control, what everyone says, it would be great if every single local community could go and decide to keep its money in, tax itself the rate that it wants to, manage its dollars. And the reason is because once it goes to Austin, people have lost all entire focus and control over those dollars. At least this way, it's closer to home and you can handle it. Advocacy. That's probably the best way this is going to be handled. There are a lot, again, from my perspective, it is not a conservative idea to go and redistribute this wealth around. But there's a lot of other Republicans who obviously voted for this. There's a lot of other Republicans who say they're conservative are more than happy to take those dollars in. But so are people. And I had this conversation with one state rep 4 weeks ago, and it sounded like he was against Robin Hood. So I went to him like, all right, can we work on something together? Like, no, my school district has both. The ones that receive and the ones that don't, so I'm not going to be part of that conversation. And that's the problem. Because the problem is people who live in are not going to support a state representative, maybe, who will go and do that. But if this is an effective earmark, okay? People have to say that they don't want that bridge. People have to say that they don't want that road. People are going to have to say, you know what? If I want that item, I'm going to pay more for it. So that advocacy, so if I will, I'd say, various state reps, call them up and say, hey, where do you stand on Robin Hood? And I think also you have that honest conversation with yourself and your own team. Say, hey, is it okay if we get away from this Robin Hood idea and not take the money from these other school districts, even themselves maybe for? That's it. I think I don't know if I have any time for questions or...
I was going to say, because I know you're leaving, so if you want to take like 2